I still remember the weight of that pen in my hand, the last time I signed my name as if it truly meant something. The lawyer sat across from me, glasses low on his nose, asking if I was sure about every word. Yes, I said, even though deep down I knew peace in a family is never guaranteed by paper. My house smelled of old books and chamomile tea that afternoon. I told myself it was the scent of closure. For years, I'd been dividing everything in my mind, not just furniture and land, but memories, love, and guilt. My husband used to say, "Don't let them fight over ghosts." So I made my will simple. Half for Michael, half for Peter. 2 sons, 1 legacy, 1 mother who tried her best to keep them from hating each other. Michael, the eldest, always carried my husband's calm nature. He worked quietly, never asked for more than he deserved. Peter, on the other hand, was fire, charming, ambitious, restless. He wanted to make his own way, but every time life hit him hard, he came back to me with that same tired smile. "Just until I get back on my feet, Mom," he'd say. And of course, I always believed him. When I finished signing the will, the lawyer looked at me for a long time. "Mrs. Collins, sometimes what you leave behind is not what people fight for, it's what they think they deserve." I didn't answer. I just folded the document carefully and placed it in the wooden box that once held my wedding rings. Somehow, it felt safer there than in any bank. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in a field of dry grass, watching 2 boys, my boys, running toward a house that was falling apart. One tried to hold the walls up, the other tried to take the door. When I woke up, my pillow was wet, and I knew the dream wasn't just a dream. It was a warning. I spent the following weeks labeling drawers, wrapping keepsakes, writing letters I never sent. My health was fading, but my thoughts grew sharper. It's funny how death clears the fog that life insists on keeping. You see things differently when you know your time is short. Every silence becomes heavy. Every word matters more than it ever did. Peter came to visit once that month. He brought flowers and a forced smile. "Don't worry, Mom," he said. "I'll make sure everything is fine when you're gone." The way he said it chilled me. Not because of the words, but the confidence behind them, as if he already knew what would happen after I was gone. As if he'd already made plans. After he left, I opened the window and let the autumn air fill the room. The trees were shedding their leaves, and I whispered, "Take what you must, but leave what's sacred." I didn't know who I was talking to, maybe to time itself. But I felt something shift, a quiet promise that my truth wouldn't die with me. That same night, I wrote one last letter. Not to my sons, not to the lawyer, but to whoever might one day need to know the truth. I sealed it, marked it, to be opened only if something feels wrong. And I hid it where no one would think to look, not among my jewelry or papers, but somewhere much closer to the heart. Now, from where I am, beyond the weight of time, I can see how right I was to trust my instinct. Because the moment I took my last breath, a second will appeared, one that bore my name but not my soul. After I was gone, the house didn't fall silent. It sighed. Michael told me once that when someone dies, the air changes. He was right. In that house, the curtains still moved even when the windows were closed, and the clock in the kitchen ticked louder than it ever had before, as if time itself wanted to make sure no one forgot I had existed. For the first few days, my sons were civil. Michael took care of the funeral. Peter made calls, pretended to help. But I could feel it, even from beyond, the tension, the invisible thread pulling tighter between them.
Michael mourned me.
Peter waited. He wasn't grieving, he was planning. The lawyer called them both a week later to read the will. I imagined the old room, the smell of leather chairs, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. Michael must have sat there with his hands folded, head bowed. Peter probably leaned back, tapping his foot, pretending to be calm while every part of him was ready to strike. When the lawyer opened the envelope and began to read, I felt relief. Finally, things would be fair. But that moment didn't last long. Because just as Michael's eyes softened with understanding, Peter smiled. A small, twisted smile, like someone who knows a secret before it's spoken aloud. 2 days later, Peter came back to that same office, holding a new document. "This," he said, "is the real will. The one my mother signed before she passed." The lawyer's brow furrowed. The signature looked familiar, almost perfect. Too perfect. And the words were not mine. It gave everything, my house, my land, my savings, to Peter alone. Michael refused to believe it. "That's not her signature," he said, voice breaking. But Peter, always smooth, replied, "She changed her mind, brother. You were always her favorite. Maybe she just wanted to make things right with me." He smiled again, the kind of smile that made even the walls colder. In that moment, something inside me stirred, not anger, not sorrow, something older. The truth has its own gravity, you know. It waits. It pulls. It bends reality until it's seen. And that forged paper, that lie dressed as love, had just started to collapse under its own weight. I watched as the lawyer hesitated, unsure which version of me to believe. The mother who divided fairly, or the one who left her legacy to a single son. It's strange, isn't it? How a piece of paper can make people forget who you truly were. That night, Peter celebrated. He opened wine, toasted to a new beginning. He didn't notice the candle flame by the photo on the mantel flicker and die. He didn't see the frame tilt slightly, as if someone had brushed by. But Michael did. He looked at that photo, at me, and whispered, "Mom, if you're there, give me a sign." And I did. That night, when Michael asked for a sign, the air around the house grew still, the kind of silence that hums like a heartbeat beneath the world. He stood alone in the living room, holding the fake will in one hand and an old photo of us in the other. The candle beside him flickered, stretched, and then steadied. He didn't move, but I knew he felt me there. I had spent my whole life believing love was enough to keep people honest. But even love, when left unguarded, can be rewritten. So I reached out the only way I could, not through sound or touch, but through memory. He turned his head toward my favorite chair, the one near the window, and for a moment, I saw recognition in his eyes. He whispered, "I can't let him win, Mom." And something in me warmed like sunlight through glass. The next morning, he searched the house. Every drawer, every old box, every place I used to hide small things that mattered. He found my pearls, a recipe book, even the letter his father had written before he died, but not what I wanted him to find. He was looking in all the right places, but not with the right heart. The truth was hidden somewhere deeper than any drawer. Peter, meanwhile, grew bolder. He moved into my house, changed the locks, replaced my curtains with new ones that had no memory of me. He walked through those rooms like a king inspecting his palace, and yet, sometimes he paused. Sometimes he'd feel that same heaviness, that hum in the air. I could tell he knew something wasn't right. The mirror in the hallway was the first to speak for me. One morning, Peter walked past it and saw a faint outline, a woman's shadow standing behind him. He turned, but the room was empty. Still, his hands trembled when he poured his coffee. Even liars know when the truth is near. Days later, Michael found a key, small, gold, with a ribbon tied around it. It had fallen from the back of a photo frame, the one that held my wedding picture. On the ribbon was a faded word, "Remember." He didn't know what it meant, but he kept it in his pocket like a prayer. From where I am, I could see his path forming, like a trail of light cutting through the fog. He would find what I left, not by following logic, but by following love. Because what I wanted him to discover wasn't just a secret, it was the truth that would set us both free. And while he searched, Peter's lies began to unravel. It always starts small, a nervous look, a misplaced document, a voice you swear you heard in an empty room. Soon, he would learn that when you forge a mother's will, you also awaken her spirit. Michael had always been the quiet one, the one who looked for meaning in small things. That's why he kept the golden key close, even when he didn't know what door it belonged to. A week after the funeral, he walked through my old house again, touching everything as if memory could still breathe through objects. He stopped by my writing desk, the one I hadn't used for years, and sat there in silence. The morning light came through the curtains I used to open every day. Dust danced in the air, and as he brushed his hand along the surface, he heard a faint click. A small panel at the back of the drawer shifted slightly. His heart raced, not because of what he found, but because of what he felt. He knew this wasn't chance. He was being guided. Inside the hidden space was a folded letter, sealed with red wax. The wax had cracked with age, but the paper still carried my scent, lavender and old ink. His fingers trembled as he opened it. The first line read, "If you're reading this, it means something went wrong." He paused, his breath catching, as if he could hear my voice through the words. He read on. "In that letter, I wrote everything. How I feared Peter's desperation. How I noticed documents missing weeks before my death. How a strange man came to the house pretending to sell insurance, but kept asking about my signature. And how I suspected my own son might try to fix his problems by changing my will. But more than warnings, I left instructions. There are 3 copies of my real will," I wrote. "One with the lawyer, one in the bank, and one you can find if you follow what your father built for us." It wasn't a riddle, it was love disguised as memory. Because what my husband built for us wasn't just a home. It was a secret place inside it. Michael folded the letter carefully, tears falling on the paper. He remembered the old chest in the attic, the one with his father's initials carved on the lid. They used to keep their tools there, but he hadn't opened it since childhood. The key in his pocket suddenly felt heavier. He knew where he had to go. That evening, he climbed the attic stairs, the wood creaking under his weight. The golden key fit perfectly. The lock turned with a sigh, as if it had been waiting. Inside the chest, beneath yellowed newspapers and old photos, there was a sealed envelope with the same handwriting. "For Michael, when the time comes." He opened it, and the real slid out, the one that divided everything equally. My signature, imperfect but alive, danced at the bottom of the page. Downstairs, the phone began to ring. It was the lawyer. He said Peter had just shown up demanding the transfer of all assets to his name. Michael looked down at the real document, his hands shaking, and for the first time, he smiled through tears. Because he finally understood, his mother hadn't left him money. She had left him truth. And truth, when revealed, has a sound. That night, as Peter signed papers in arrogance, the wind howled through the windows like a voice returning home. He would soon hear what he had tried to silence. Morning came with a strange calm, the kind that visits right before a storm. Michael stood outside the lawyer's office, clutching both envelopes, one real, one false. Inside, Peter was already seated, smiling as if the world finally owed him something. The lawyer, a decent man torn between duty and doubt, greeted them both and sighed. He had seen too many families crumble under ink and greed. I watched from the corner of that room that doesn't belong to the living or the dead, the space where truth waits. Michael placed the real will on the table, its edges worn, its seal unbroken. "This is my mother's handwriting," he said, voice steady but trembling. Peter laughed, sharp and cruel. "Nice story, brother. You expect anyone to believe you found that in an attic." But his eyes flickered, just for a second, because even liars recognize the truth when it's staring back at them. The lawyer picked up both documents and studied them under the light. He noticed what Michael had already seen, the difference in the loops of the letters, the slight slant in my signature that no one could ever mimic. He leaned back, hands folded, and said quietly, "Mr. Collins, I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen every kind of fraud imaginable. But this," he tapped the forged will with his finger, "this is not your mother's hand." Peter's smile cracked like glass. He tried to speak, but words turned to dust on his tongue. His wife, who had been sitting in the back of the room, shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes darted between the papers, and for the first time, guilt began to seep through her polished expression. Because she knew. She had helped him do it. Michael didn't gloat, didn't shout. He simply said, Mom always told us the truth finds its way. The lawyer nodded and took a deep breath. I'll need to report this to the authorities. Forgery is a serious crime. Peter's face turned pale. The arrogance that had carried him all his life began to crumble, piece by piece, until all that was left was a frightened child sitting in a man's chair. As they argued, a gust of wind rushed through the room, though no window was open. The papers fluttered, and for a moment, my letter, the one I'd written to protect them, landed on the floor beside Peter's shoes. He bent down to pick it up, and as he did, he saw the words that I had written in trembling ink. Love can forgive, but justice never forgets. He froze. His eyes watered. For the first time, he wasn't acting. The lie had collapsed. The truth had found its voice. And though no one could see me, I whispered, "It's over, my son." That day, the forged will was destroyed, and the real one restored. But something far greater had been uncovered, the part of the soul that no amount of money can save once it's old. The court smelled of old paper and regret. Every echo of footsteps seemed to carry the weight of my family's name. Michael sat quietly in the front row, eyes lowered, hands clasped, as if praying not for victory, but for peace. Peter, in his suit that didn't quite fit, looked smaller than ever, not in size, but in spirit. Even the judge seemed to sense the tragedy beneath the case, not just a forgery, but a family torn apart by greed. When the lawyer presented my real will, the courtroom fell silent. He explained the discrepancies, the handwriting, the ink, the missing pages from my drafts. Every word was a nail sealing the coffin of Peter's lies. His defense tried to argue emotional distress, confusion, and a son's desperate attempt to fix his mother's mistake. But truth has a way of cutting through even the most rehearsed performances. I watched as Peter avoided Michael's gaze. For years, he had carried envy like a secret poison, pretending it was ambition. Now, stripped of pretense, he was just a frightened man facing the shadow of his own choices. When asked to speak, he stood slowly, his voice breaking before the first sentence left his lips. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. I thought she owed me something." The judge leaned forward. "Your mother owed you nothing but love. And she gave you that, didn't she?" Peter nodded, tears welling up. "I didn't want to lose everything. I thought Michael always had her blessing. I wanted to feel chosen too." His confession wasn't loud. It didn't echo. But in that still room, every word landed like thunder. Michael's eyes softened. He didn't smile, didn't move. He just watched his brother, not with hatred, but with sorrow. And in that moment, I saw a glimpse of the son I had raised, the man his father would have been proud of. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken. It just sits quietly in the heart, waiting to be felt. The judge sentenced Peter to probation and restitution. No prison could fix what had been broken, but at least justice had been named. The forged will was declared void, and my true one reinstated. My home, my land, my memories, all returned to balance. Yet I knew the real punishment would not come from the court. It would come each night, in the silence between Peter and his own reflection. When the trial ended, Michael left without saying a word. He stepped outside into the sunlight, breathing in as if the air itself had been cleansed. Peter followed behind, slower, his face pale, his hands shaking. He stopped by the courthouse steps and whispered into the wind, "I'm sorry, Mom." And though I could no longer touch him, I let the wind carry my answer, gentle, forgiving, final. Because I had already forgiven him long before the law ever did. After the trial, silence returned to the house, but not the same silence as before. This one was softer, almost kind. Michael began to restore the old rooms, dusting the shelves, fixing the garden, and bringing back the flowers I used to love. Each movement of his hands felt like a prayer, a way of telling me that love had survived the storm. Yet, deep down, he still carried one question. Why did she hide the letter for so long? One afternoon, as he was sorting through the drawers of my writing desk, he found a small envelope tucked beneath the lining. It wasn't sealed, as if waiting to be opened when hearts were ready. On the front, In faint ink were the words, "For both of you." Michael hesitated. He called Peter, and for the first time in months, they stood side by side in that house without anger between them. The letter began simply, "My sons, if you're reading this together, it means you finally stood still long enough to listen." I had written those words months before my passing, not knowing how or when they would find them. But I trusted that time, like truth, always delivers its messages to the right hands. Michael, you were born with patience. Peter, you were born with fire. I spent my life trying to make you love each other, when maybe all I had to do was let you see how much of me lives in both of you. They read in silence. Peter's tears fell first, smudging the ink slightly, blending the words into soft shadows. Michael placed his hand over his brother's shoulder. No words, just forgiveness flowing between them. I hid my letters not because I didn't trust you, but because I needed to protect you from what greed could do before you learned to protect yourselves. Money divides, love restores. And when I'm gone, I want my memory to do only one thing: bring you back together. Peter broke down, covering his face, his shoulders shaking with the weight of his choices. Michael stood still, his jaw trembling, fighting his own tears. They weren't enemies anymore, just two men mourning the same woman, finally understanding what she had been trying to teach them all along. At the bottom of the letter, I had written one final line, the kind only a mother could leave behind. "If you truly wish to honor me, don't visit my grave. Visit each other." Peter folded the paper and held it against his chest. Michael nodded, whispering, "We will, Mom." And in that moment, a warm breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of lavender, my favorite, through every corner of that old house. From where I am, I smiled, because that was the day my will, my real will, was finally fulfilled. Not the one written in ink, but the one carved in their hearts. The house had always been a mirror of our hearts, cracked in places, beautiful in others, but never beyond repair. After that day, Michael and Peter began to rebuild it together. The tension that once lingered in every wall faded with each stroke of paint, each repaired tile, each shared silence that no longer hurt. It was as if every nail, every board they replaced whispered, "You're home again." Michael handled the repairs patiently, moving with quiet precision. Peter worked beside him, slower, unsure at first, but willing. He stopped trying to lead and started learning instead, how to listen, how to care, how to forgive himself. It was the first time in years that his hands built instead of destroyed. And I watched proud, because that's what forgiveness does. It turns pain into purpose. Sometimes when they worked late, Peter would talk to the air, as if speaking to me. He'd say, "You were right, Mom. I let the wrong part of me take over." Michael never answered out loud, but I saw how he looked at his brother, not with pity, but with peace. He understood that some apologies are too fragile to be spoken. They're meant to be lived. One afternoon, they found an old photograph behind the bookshelf, me, holding both of them as children, smiling under the apple tree their father planted. Peter stared at it for a long time before saying, "We almost lost everything, didn't we?" Michael nodded. "No," he said softly. "We almost lost each other." They placed the photo on the fireplace, and for the first time, the house felt alive again. Every corner of that home began to breathe. The smell of burnt coffee in the mornings, the sound of the floor creaking, the laughter that slowly returned. It was all part of a quiet resurrection. They even replanted the lavender garden outside my window, the same one I used to tend when life still felt endless. Each bloom that rose from the soil carried forgiveness in its scent. At night, Peter sometimes dreamed of me, not as a ghost, but as memory. He'd see me sitting by the window, smiling faintly, the same way I did when he was a boy sneaking cookies from the jar. He'd wake up crying, not from fear, but from gratitude. Because now he finally understood. I never wanted to punish him, only to guide him back to himself. Michael, too, changed. He stopped carrying the quiet pride of being the good son. He saw his brother not as a burden, but as a man who had fallen and chosen to rise. And in that understanding both were freed. Forgiveness had turned their inheritance into something the world couldn't steal. From my side of the veil, I could see it clearly. The house that once echoed with lies now hummed with peace. They didn't need my voice anymore to hear my love. They had found it in each other, and that was all I ever wanted. It was spring when they finally came to visit me. The lavender in the garden had begun to bloom again, just as it had the year I passed. The air was gentle, the sun low, and the world seemed softer somehow, like it had forgiven too. Michael carried flowers. Peter carried nothing but his guilt, which by then had already started to fade into something gentler. Humility. The cemetery was quiet, except for the sound of wind brushing against stone. They stood side by side, unsure what to say. The distance between them was gone, but grief has a way of silencing even healed hearts. Michael placed the bouquet on the grave and whispered, "You were right about everything." Peter looked down, hands trembling, and said, "And I was wrong about everything that mattered." For a moment, they both stood still. Two men, once divided by lies, now bound by truth. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was sacred. They didn't cry loudly or fall to their knees. They just breathed together, in rhythm, the way they did when they were boys waiting for their mother to finish reading bedtime stories. And even though the air was still, both felt something pass through them, warm, familiar, eternal. That was me. Not as a ghost, not as sorrow, but as light. I brushed past them gently, the way I used to run my hand through their hair when they were small. Peter closed his eyes, and a tear slipped down his cheek. He whispered, "I felt her." And Michael, without hesitation, replied, "I did too." In that instant, I wished I could hold them one last time, to tell them that I was proud, that everything painful had served its purpose. But I didn't need to. They already knew. The lavender petals lifted in the wind, circling above their heads, catching sunlight like tiny sparks. They looked up and smiled through tears. Peter knelt, his hand resting on the grave. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said softly. And from the other side, I answered in the only way I could, through the whisper of the breeze, through the warmth of the sun on his face. "You do now." Because forgiveness isn't given to the innocent. It's given to those brave enough to face who they've been. When they left, they didn't look back. They didn't need to. The peace they sought wasn't in the ground. It was walking beside them. They came as two men haunted by the past, and left as brothers reborn through truth. When people think of a will, they think of money, land, jewelry, the things that glitter and fade. But my real will was never written on paper. It was written in the moments between my words, in the quiet sacrifices no one saw, in the nights I stayed awake praying that love would outlast resentment. Every mother leaves something behind, but the greatest inheritance is invisible. It lives in the choices our children make after we're gone. From where I am now, I see my sons clearly, not as they were in court or in anger, but as two small boys chasing each other through the fields, laughter echoing across the golden grass. That is how I remember them, before pride, before pain, before life turned them into strangers. They found their way back, and in doing so, they gave me peace I never found while alive. Michael visits the house often. He keeps it open, filled with light, and welcomes anyone who needs a meal or a story. Peter works in the garden, planting new lavender every spring. Sometimes he talks to me, sometimes he just listens to the wind. But both know that I am still there, not haunting, just watching, smiling at how far they've come. The forged papers are gone, burned and forgotten, but their lesson remains. Greed fades faster than ink. Truth endures longer than stone. The law gave them justice, but forgiveness gave them freedom. And it was in that forgiveness that my soul finally found rest. Because no court, no signature, no title could ever declare what was already written in eternity. I often think about that lawyer's words, the day I first signed my will. He said, "What you leave behind is not what they fight for, it's what they think they deserve." And now I understand. What my sons truly deserved was not my house, but my heart. Not my possessions, but my presence. And now, through love, they have both. If I could speak to them one last time, I'd say, I never left you anything you could touch. I left you everything you could become. Because love, once born from truth, never dies. It only changes form, waiting patiently for the day we all meet again where no one needs forgiveness anymore. So if you ever wonder what was written in my real will, it wasn't my name or their inheritance. It was this single line, sealed with tears and hope. May love be the only thing my children ever fight to keep. And with that, my story ends, not with death, but with peace. Because in the end, I didn't just leave a house behind. I left a home reborn in the hearts of those who finally understood what family truly means.